It was the day after Christmas, 1996, when JonBenét's family discovered she'd vanished. A ransom note left behind. Her mother, Patsy, called police.
Hey, what's your name? Are you Patsy Ramsey? I'm the mother. Oh, my God. Do you know how long she's been gone? No, I don't.
Grand jury deliberating for 13 months on whether to indict JonBenét's parents for her murder.
There is DNA in this case. Okay. It is unidentified male DNA.
We're hiding behind your public relations people, your attorneys.
We're not hiding behind anyone.
Who murdered JonBenét Ramsey?
Just before 6 a.m. on December 26, 1996, Patsy Ramsey descended the spiral staircase of the 7,000 square foot home in Boulder, Colorado she shared with her husband, John, and the couple's 2 children, their 9-year-old son, Burke, and their 6-year-old daughter, JonBenét. She opened a door just off the kitchen and found spread across the back steps a 2.5-page note on which someone claimed to have kidnapped JonBenét and demanded $118,000 in exchange for her safe return. The language of the note was florid and theatrical, swinging between pseudo-military phrasing like, "We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction," to movie-like dialogue like, "Don't try to grow a brain, John." It was both menacing and absurd. It read less like a work of a criminal and more like an amateur trying to perform like one. The note concluded by warning the family not to call the police, but within minutes, Patsy, after rushing to wake her husband and confirming that JonBenét was not in her bed, dialed 911. Her voice shook as she reported the kidnapping to officials and asked them to rush over. She then called family and friends to come to the house for support. When officers arrived, they found the Ramseys distraught but composed. John, a successful software executive, and Patsy, a devoted mother active in charity and the pageant world, opened their home to investigators, even as friends and neighbors poured in to comfort them. At first, police treated the case as a kidnapping. The FBI was called, and officers combed through the note for clues while waiting for a ransom call that never came. Around 1 p.m., Detective Linda Arndt suggested the family search the house for anything unusual. Moments later, John Ramsey, searching a little used basement room, found his daughter's lifeless body hidden beneath the stairs. JonBenét was wrapped in a white blanket, her mouth covered with duct tape, her wrists tied with a cord, and a garrote fashioned from a broken paintbrush handle looped around her neck. She had been strangled and suffered a skull fracture. John picked up her daughter's body, an unfortunate act that would forever taint the crime scene, and carried her upstairs to officers. From that moment forward, the murder of JonBenét Ramsey would become one of the most haunting and sensational unsolved crimes in American history. The case dominated television screens and newspaper headlines for years. It served as a sequel to the O.J. Simpson drama that had concluded 2 years earlier, and together the 2 cases marked the dawn of cable TV-driven, around-the-clock media crime coverage. CNN, Dateline, and tabloids across the country built a continuous cycle of speculation, just as America tried to make sense of the unthinkable, a child murdered in her own home on Christmas. To some, the case symbolized a moral decline, the unraveling of innocence in a society obsessed with fame, beauty, and material success. To others, it exposed how wealth and privilege could distort justice, a parable about a rich family who, many believe, were behind the murder and used their money and influence to escape accountability. Indeed, JonBenét's family members were long viewed as the most obvious suspects, their behavior, the bizarre ransom note, and the condition of the crime scene all raising difficult questions. Yet the deeper investigators looked, the less certain the picture became. Evidence, once thought clear-cut, grew murky, and newer forensic techniques complicated earlier assumptions. What seemed at first like an open and shut case was in the end far more complex. Or was it? Perhaps the most obvious explanation was the right one all along. I'm Jason Beckerman.
I'm Derek Kaufman.
This is Last Days, JonBenét Ramsey.
The Ramseys were not just another family in Boulder. John Ramsey was the president of a computer systems company later acquired by Lockheed Martin. By 1996, he had become a millionaire several times over, successful, respected, and by all accounts, devoted to his family. Patsy, his wife of 16 years, was a former Miss West Virginia, overflowing with Southern polish and social ambition. Together, they were fixtures in local charity circles and among the city's small social elite. Their youngest child, JonBenét, was the center of Patsy's world. Blonde, bright, and precocious, she had already accumulated a small collection of pageant crowns by the age of 6. Patsy dressed her in sequin gowns, styled her hair into tight curls, and choreographed her routines. To many outsiders, the sight of a kindergartner made up like a contestant from Miss America was unsettling, but to Patsy, it was a family tradition and a mother-daughter project that bonded them. Photos of JonBenét in elaborate costumes, smiling, waving, performing, would later become the defining images of the murder investigation. The ransom note, purportedly found by Patsy that morning on the back steps, would soon become the centerpiece of the investigation and one of the most infamous pieces of evidence in modern criminal history. Written on paper torn from a legal pad belonging to the family, and with a pen taken from Patsy's own desk, the note appeared to have been composed inside the Ramsey home. It stretched across 2.5 pages, a length that stunned criminologists who said it was unprecedented for ransom notes, which are typically short and concise to avoid inadvertently disclosing incriminating information. The note began with the phrase, quote, "We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction," an opening line so bizarre and affected that many investigators immediately doubted its authenticity. The writer demanded $118,000 for JonBenét's safe return, a precise figure that matched John Ramsey's most recent Christmas bonus. To detectives, that meant the author had intimate knowledge of the family's finances. The note's tone shifted erratically, at moments cold and militaristic. "You will withdraw $118,000 from your account. $100,000 will be in $100 bills and the remaining $18,000 in $20 bills. Then oddly conversational. "Don't try to grow a brain, John," and even reassuring. "She is safe and unharmed."
It's so interesting. You think about this note that investigators find. They have no reason to doubt anything the family is saying when they find this note. Well, Patsy finds the notes, hands it over. And they start reading this thing. It's 2.5 pages. And
it's like out of a movie.
It's out of a movie. Well,
it doesn't make any sense.
The way it's written is, the handwriting is sort of weird. And it's got all this, like, it is out of a movie. It's overly theatrical. And then it says the exact amount that it demands in ransom, the exact amount as his Christmas bonus. How many people are going to be acutely aware of the exact amount of his Christmas bonus?
It did seem like they were trying to suggest a sort of inside familiarity by being so specific about the number that they were targeted in some way, that this was someone who knew the family, knew John, knew the elite circles that they were in, and had enough familiarity that they could demand exactly what he had just received as a bonus. I think that was part of the plot, but it was very, very odd because this is a small community and he was one of the elites, but to know that level of detail is bizarre.
This has been 30 years now, just 29 years, and the thing I remember most when hearing these stories was about this note, about how investigators were completely perplexed by it because it just rang so untrue and was so counter to everything that anybody who studied this kind of thing knew about ransom notes. This is a one of one.
I agree with you. On the criminal side, certainly the note was the standout piece, but as the nation processed this, you just think of JonBenét in those costumes, in the sequin, and the curls, and the cowboy boots, and the whole thing. It was very much of the moment of the CNN round-the-clock coverage, and it grabbed America. This was a precocious little girl who was savagely murdered.
And forensic analysis added to the mystery. The note was written with a shaky hand, as though the writer was trying to disguise their normal handwriting. Experts later determined that at least part of the letter was likely composed while the writer was seated comfortably, not in haste, unusual for a kidnapper acting under pressure. Even stranger was the setting in which it was found. The note lay on the back stairway inside the house, not at the front door in the open where it might easily be discovered. Its placement, combined with the lack of any forced entry and the fact it was written on the Ramsey stationery with the Ramsey's pen, led police to conclude that the writer wrote the note while seated inside the Ramsey's house. Meanwhile, the note's length and purposely disguised handwriting suggested the perpetrator took his or her time to draft it, and that was presumably after committing the crime and quite carefully wrapping and then concealing the body in the basement. If it was a kidnapping, it was unlike anything the investigators had ever seen, done with a long, calm deliberation while at the crime scene.
Almost right away, suspicion circled around the parents. The ransom note was implausible, the crime scene disorganized, and the family's behavior seemed to many observers unnatural. Why had Patsy called friends to the house before police arrived? Why had John moved the body, contaminating crucial evidence? Why was there no sign of forced entry? Within weeks, headlines openly suggested that the Ramseys knew more than they were saying. Tabloids ran stories about a mother with an explosive temper, a father with something to hide. Television anchors analyzed body language and word choice from the family's interviews. The Ramseys' decision to hire lawyers and a public relations firm rather than sit for extended police questioning only deepened the perception of guilt. Yet despite months of investigation, no criminal charges were brought against either John or Patsy Ramsey. Prosecutors said the evidence was circumstantial, the forensic record muddied by early missteps at the scene. In the absence of clear proof, officials and the public were left with inference, and inference alone. Still, the prevailing narrative hardened. The parents had done it, whether in a moment of rage or in the staging of an accident gone wrong. The Ramseys fought back in the only way they could, through the media. They sat for interviews, issued television pleas for the real killer to come forward, and spoke of their faith in God and their hope for justice. Here's Patsy in May 1997 at a press conference protesting her innocence and issuing a direct threat to the person who killed her daughter.
I'm appalled that anyone would think that John or I would be involved in such a hideous, heinous crime. The police and investigators have assured us that this is a case which can be solved. You know, you may be eluding the authorities for a time, but God knows who you are, and we will find you.
But these statements, no matter how heartfelt, rarely change minds. To many viewers, the performances seem polished and practiced. Just another lie to cloud the obvious truth that John and Patsy killed their daughter. As time passed, alternative theories began to surface, each with its own loyal following. Every detail of the case, from the ransom note to the undigested pineapple found in JonBenét's stomach, became a clue in competing narratives about what had really happened. One theory centered on people who had regular access to the home. The Ramseys employed housekeepers, gardeners, and contractors. Any one of them could have known the layout of the sprawling property. Early on, police questioned a former housekeeper who had keys to the home and had once expressed resentment towards Patsy, but her alibi checked out. A handyman who had recently worked at the house was also investigated, as was a window installer familiar with the basement area where JonBenet was found. But there was still no solid leads. Attention also turned to 9-year-old Burke Ramsey. His name was largely kept out of early reporting, but rumors circulated almost immediately that he might have played a role, accidentally or otherwise, in his sister's death. The theory was simple. A sibling quarrel turned violent, and the parents covered it up to protect their son. Supporters of this view pointed to the bowl of pineapple and milk found on the kitchen table, the undigested fruit in JonBenét's stomach, and the boy's odd, detached demeanor in later television interviews. Critics noted that the physical evidence did not support such a theory. Burke's DNA was not found on the garrote or duct tape, and that there was no indication he had ever been violent. But the idea lingered, fed by the family's perceived secrecy and the mystery surrounding Burke's interrogation, which police delayed for months.
But the most enduring alternative in theory involved an intruder, someone outside the family who entered the home in the night. Detectives found a broken basement window and a scuff mark nearby, suggesting a possible entry. A suitcase was positioned beneath the window as if it had been used to climb out or block the view from the outside. Years later, this theory was buttressed when, in 2008, advanced testing revealed the presence of unidentified male DNA on JonBenét's clothes, genetic material that did not match any member of the Ramsey family or anyone known to have been in the home. This discovery was announced publicly by the Boulder District Attorney's Office, which issued an extraordinary statement effectively clearing the Ramseys of suspicion. The Boulder District Attorney's Office does not consider John or Patsy Ramsey suspects in the death of their daughter, the statement read. To many, that pronouncement seemed like a long overdue vindication, a scientific confirmation of what the Ramseys had been saying all along, that an unknown intruder had killed their daughter. The intruder theory gained traction from other pieces of physical evidence. The basement window, found ajar, could have served as a point of entry. A partial footprint on the basement floor did not match any family member. And to those inclined to believe in the Ramseys' innocence, these details formed a coherent story. A kidnap attempt gone wrong, a ransom note written in haste to mislead, and a killer who escaped into the night. But the DNA evidence, while persuasive in public perception, was far from dispositive. From the beginning, forensic experts raised doubts about its reliability. The genetic material came from a tiny sample, a few skin cells, possibly transferred during manufacturing or handling of the clothing. In an era before widespread contamination controls, even a single ungloved technician or packaging worker could have left trace DNA that decades later would appear foreign. Moreover, the DNA appeared in multiple locations on the garments, in ways inconsistent with a single deliberate act of violence. Critics of the exoneration argued that the district attorney's statement went beyond what the science supported. The presence of unknown DNA, they said, did not prove an intruder. It only proved that someone's DNA was present, a distinction often lost in public retelling. Former investigators in the case, including several from the Boulder Police Department, maintained that the DNA finding had been overinterpreted and that the Ramseys should never have been so publicly absolved.
And then, in 2013, facts came to light which further undermined law enforcement's version of events. Previously sealed documents were made public showing that, in 1999, a Boulder County grand jury was convened to review years of evidence and testimony. For months, jurors heard from investigators, forensic experts, and witnesses close to the family. The proceedings were sealed, and at the time, District Attorney Alex Hunter announced that the grand jury had declined to indict anyone. For years, that was the accepted public story, that the evidence simply wasn't strong enough. But that was a lie. The grand jury had, in fact, issued indictments for both John and Patsy Ramsey on charges of child abuse resulting in death and accessory to a crime. The jurors found there was sufficient evidence to conclude that JonBenét's parents had caused the death of their daughter and had then obstructed the ensuing investigation. The DA, however, chose not to sign the indictment, stating that there was insufficient evidence to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. In effect, the Ramseys had been technically indicted but never charged, a legal limbo that preserved both their freedom and the public's lingering doubts.
This was the wildest development of the case happened in this 2013.
I've never heard of this before because the reason that you go to a grand jury is because the DA has signed off on it.
That's right.
With the hope of getting a conviction 100 times out of 100. Indictment. You get that indictment, and instead of going forward, you bury it. You don't even announce, despite the indictment, I'm not going forward. You bury it so the public doesn't know for 17 years after the killing. You don't alert the public. They only find out because of efforts to get records by the public.
People who are enduringly interested in this case and so dogged in uncovering this, because this all happened in 1999 when the grand jury convened.
Right.
Now, usually we should walk people through a little bit what it means to convene a grand jury. The prosecutors, the DA in the case, they're giving over all the information they think is available to prove a charge beyond a reasonable doubt against the Ramseys. And the jurors listen to all that evidence. This is not a jury that sits in a trial. This is a grand jury that decides whether to indict.
Professional jurors who do this kind of for a living.
That's right. And they marshal all the evidence they can and say, is there enough here to bring a case against these two people for the death of JonBenét Ramsey? And they said yes. And typically that takes it off the prosecutor.
Typically, 100 times out of 100, the prosecutor then goes forward because you have the indictment.
You have it.
You can now go arrest the perpetrators. And if the case falls apart at that point, fine. But the DA intervenes here, and there'd been all this talk about this wealthy family, this very well-connected family.
Right.
And
being connected politically, DAs are elected officials in most jurisdictions. Right. This is a rich family with connections.
Just throughout all this period, the DA themselves saying we can't go forward because there's this DNA evidence, and this is the DA who comes out and publicly claims they've been exonerated. Then in 2013, we find out that despite the DA saying they're exonerated, despite this DNA evidence, which is very thin, a few skin cells full of DNA evidence.
Right.
I have also ignored a grand jury's indictment and quashed it. It's just incredible to me. I knew about it at the time. I was reminded of it in researching for the pod. I'm still flabbergasted.
It creates a ton of distrust because remember, in 1999, they get this indictment, which he decides not to go forward with. But then it looks like they're working tirelessly on alternative theories the grand jury found the perpetrators they wanted to hold responsible for the crime. And then they worked tirelessly to find random skin cells as a means of exonerating, and then overinterpreted that evidence as a means of publicly stating that the Ramseys had no role at all in the death of their daughter. It boggles the mind.
It really does. It's prosecutorial misconduct from my perspective. I mean, I'm sure if we were to ask the DA why he did what he did, he'd have justifications and reasons and everything else. But just from you and I are lawyers, we see enough of this in our jobs to see how the process works, how it works commonly, day in, day out, and this is a huge deviation from the process.
Absolutely. I want to say one more thing. Prosecutors are entrusted to pursue justice, not to sort of always find someone responsible. They want to find people responsible for the crime, but they're trying to do overall justice. So it's not on its face something you wouldn't want to do to pursue alternative theories. That's their responsibility as well. It's just the way this played out. Yeah. It just is really stinky. Yeah. That's all it is. By the time this revelation became public, Patsy Ramsey was already gone. She had been diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer in the late 90s and died in 2006, still insisting on her innocence. She was buried beside JonBenét in Marietta, Georgia. John, who later remarried and withdrew from public life, has continued to maintain that an intruder was responsible and to press for renewed investigation using modern DNA techniques. In the years since, the Boulder Police Department has reopened and re-examined the case several times. Modern testing has produced more refined genetic profiles, but none that clearly identify a suspect. The sample remains too limited and the chain of custody too long compromised. A few private labs have claimed progress, but as of today, no one has been charged and no definitive link has been established between the unidentified male DNA and any known criminal or database entry. Meanwhile, the case has never fully released its grip on the American imagination. Each new anniversary brings renewed attention, new documentaries, and new theories. For many, it has become a symbol of investigative failure, a portrait of how a single case can collapse under the weight of human error, public pressure, and media obsession. For others, it remains a riddle that might still be solved.
But today, nearly 3 decades later, every lead has been pursued, every suspect scrutinized, every piece of evidence reinterpreted. Yet the core mystery endures. Who killed a 6-year-old girl in her own home on Christmas, and why? The DNA points in one direction, the behavior of the family in another. The grand jury's shadow still lingers, as do the doubts that no amount of science or time has managed to erase. Derek, gotta ask it. Hearing all this, going through it again, what are your thoughts?
I see a tragedy. I don't think
that's
that.
easy.
Yeah,
That's a tragedy.
Sounds like a cop out, but I've seen a lot of documentaries. I've read a lot about this case. I've always thought that this could have been an accident involving Burke. That's just a personal opinion where, sibling rivalry, the pineapple with the milk, something tragic happened, and then two parents, distraught over seeing their dead daughter, panicked to save their son and covered up the crime. That's always endured in my head. I don't think there's any, solid evidence linking Burke to this crime, but it's always nagged at me as a possible explanation other than just pure sociopathy to kill your daughter who you're obsessed with.
Yeah. How
about you?
Going through this, I see no doubt. I see not necessarily Burke, and whether accidentally, and I agree, there's no evidence that parents had any animus to their daughter or would have intentionally killed her, but nevertheless, whether accidentally or purposefully, I firmly conclude, looking at the evidence based on nothing except what I've seen, that this child died in their hands, in their house, and the parents knew about it, and the parents then sought to cover it up. The way the note was written with a purposely shaky hand, when I used to pretend I was Santa Claus to my little kids, I'd write like a little note to them in a purposely shaky hand, so it was a little joke we kind of did. And I know what that's like. And apparently the note looked just like that.
The note's absurd too with the intruder theories. Then you have to say an unknown intruder knew the $118,000 bonus. Wrote a 2.5-page letter with the pen in the house.
Unknown intruder comes in, for whatever reason kills JonBenét. Maybe it happens upon her. Then sits, remember, with the family pen, sits comfortably in their home
2.5 pages
with the dead daughter and writes 2.5 pages worth of scrawly, weird handwriting, and then puts it on the back porch for some reason. It makes no sense. And
he goes down and discovers
then never
her.
Follows up, writes this note with the aim of getting $118,000, but then never calls to try and get a ransom. Just disappears into the firmament. So why write the note at all?
Right.
None of it makes any sense at all. It's just, we talk about Occam's razor, right? The most logical conclusion that you can draw is likely the right one.
That's right.
Here, the most logical conclusion is that the parents covered up either a tragedy or a homicide. We don't know which, but nevertheless, that's the most logical conclusion.
I agree.
Right? But no matter what we or anyone else might think, the case remains where it began, in a quiet Boulder neighborhood with more questions than answers. Perhaps one day, technology would deliver certainty. Or perhaps, as with so many enduring mysteries, the truth will never be known.